we're back. Stripe Show podcast on a Thursday. I'm your host, Travis Fulton. Thank you for making us part of your day. Hope you're having a great week. Happy June 1st to everybody. Today's podcast brought to you by About Golf Simulators. You can see it glowing in the backdrop, ready to go. Full lesson book today, 6 lessons. Had 6 yesterday, and I've got 6 on Friday. So a nice week. People playing golf. June is a busy, busy month in Florida, both in person and online. If you're listening, you want an online lesson, go to my website, travisfultongolf.com. You can get more information there. My training programs, getting a lot of good work done. One of my favorite new content pieces that we've been posting on my social sites has been online gains. You've been seeing a lot of my students and the changes that we're making. I talked a lot about some of those changes, some of the more consistent patterns that we're seeing, that I'm seeing, I should say, and some of the things I've been doing to fix those issues in particular past. Talked about some of those yesterday with Jonathan Yarwood, one of the top teachers in the game, someone that I've got to be pretty good friends with over the last couple of years online. We exchange a lot of DMs, and I've really enjoyed our friendship. I think we come at it relatively from the same angle many, many times. I enjoy listening to his perspective. I enjoy listening to his insight. I enjoy listening to his dialogue and the way that he's critiquing swings and the application in which he's going to go about to fix them. I've learned a lot from him. And he was fantastic yesterday. He really was. I'd go back and listen to that. We talked about a lot of things, including Viktor Hovland's swing, which we're going to revisit here in a second. I'm getting some questions from yesterday's pod about Viktor Hovland. A lot of people think that Viktor comes over the top, and he doesn't come over the top. So we're going to clean up a few of those things and talk about what you're looking at there and why he swings the way that he does to hit that fade. And in many ways, with his irons, he's trying to hit that high fade. That's kind of his feel. So we're going to get to that here in a second. We also talked about the changes that he made with Paige Spiranek, which was interesting, and some really significant changes. I posted some of those on my sites. Go check that out on Instagram at Travis Fulton Golf, Twitter at Travis Fulton. I'm also on TikTok now, believe it or not. My YouTube stuff is growing. We appreciate you being here. Excited about what's ahead here this summer, both in person in the studio, but also online, and particularly here in the Stripe Show podcast. Keith Stewart, you may have figured out by now, he'll be a part of this team every Tuesday. Really fortunate to have Keith. He is a wonderful mind on site for many of the tournaments, comes at it from a very balanced angle, a PGA pro, great insight. He's been on site now 2 times before this week, and we've picked a winner both times. And so we're going for 3 for 3. He will be a part of this team every Tuesday moving forward. So thank you for being here. Tuesdays, all things what you need to know as far as the tournament in the week ahead with Keith Stewart. We're still going to be having some guests with us from time to time. Tour players coming back on Wednesday, and then an instruction Thursday with the best teachers in the world. It's just me today. Let's get right after it here and talk about this guy, Viktor Hovland. For those listening, I'm going to articulate this. I am going to articulate this as well as I can. For those that are just listening, for those that are watching here on YouTube, you can see Viktor dressed in red. It's a pretty conservative outfit for Viktor Hovland. But when we look at Viktor Hovland, the first thing that comes to mind is that right there. Top of the swing, you look at that left wrist. The left wrist is flexed or bowed or arched. Those are the terms we use. The club face is looking up to the sky. So the left wrist is flexed. The club face is looking up to the sky. So that club face is a little shut. Now, from here, when you have those wrist angles and club face, you've got to be someone who is going to be able to be pretty dynamic through the zone, meaning you've got to be able to get out of the way, rotate, get the left hip to get out of the way. Get the left shoulder to get out of the way. So the hand path can exit relatively to the left. Now, if you can't do that, then you're going to have to be very strong, like a Brooks Koepka, to be able to kind of hold those wrist angles off. That's my perspective, right? I look at a lot of these types of swings. I look at a DJ, I look at a Viktor Hovland, and I see the left wrist flex and the club face shut. But then I see two guys in Hovland and DJ that can really move and can be very dynamic with their body. You look at that side bend down in there. You see him really kind of going down, crunching down, that right elbow bent. Jonathan and I talked about this yesterday, kind of the late straightening of the right arm. But that's a wonderful look at impact. And look at how you can see the back of his left leg. I mean, he is out of the way. His hips are open. His shoulders are open. And then watch where this club exits back under the shoulder. Okay, so it's really exiting left through the shoulder. Now, Brooks Koepka, he's not as dynamic as far as opening up, but he's a big, strong guy, so he can hold those angles off when it comes to the extension in the right wrist, the flexion in the left wrist. He can really hold those angles, per se, through the strike and not let the face flip over, because you can't let the face flip over. You've got to have some shaft lean here if you're going to have those kind of dynamics at the top of the swing. So you start to think about, well, how does that apply to me, Travis, the listener? And that's one of the things that I've always tried to do over the years. Every coach, I think, in the game has their strengths, right? I think about the coaches in today's game. I think about a Mike Adams, a Chris Como. Like, their strengths, to me, these guys are heavy researchers. They understand the golf swing, the biomechanics, the geometry, 3D, force play. I mean, they're very entrenched in the information. They are two of the guys that I would go to if I've got a question. Their strength is the information. I think about Claude Harmon III. His strength, to me, and Claude was in the media this week, out there taking some swings at the media. But Claude's strength, to me, is working with better players. I mean, his dad, no better teacher than his dad when it comes to protecting the genius of world-class players and allowing them to go out and be instinctive and perform. I think Claude is excellent in that form. That's his strength. I think about Rick Smith. Rick Smith, to me, his strength, he's really good in a lot of areas. But to me, Rick Smith, his major strength is in the way that he communicates. I can remember being a young teacher watching him on Golf Channel, and his strength was his communication, articulating, right? Making it make sense, taking a complex situation and allowing it to be fed to you in a way that makes sense to the average golfer. So we all have our strengths. To me, I think my strength is to be able to look at golf swings like this, explain to you what is happening here with Viktor Hovland and why he swings the way that he does, and what he works on historically in the path with Jeff Smith and now Pat Mayo. Excuse me, not Pat Mayo, but Joseph Mayo. Pat Mayo's the gambler. Joseph Mayo. But also how this might apply to you, right? How does this apply to you? And Jonathan and I talked about this a little bit yesterday. When you take it up to the top, and if you've got a flex lead wrist and you've got the club face shut, well, you better be very dynamic through the zone. You better be able to move. You better be able to get open, or you better be pretty strong like a Brooks Koepka. Now, I think there's different levels of flexion and closing the face. I mean, this is a very extreme example, as is Dustin Johnson. When I see a player come in and they get the club face open, right, and they get the toe hanging down or borderline open, and that's countered with a little bit of extension in the left wrist, and then I see that player come down and lose shaft lean at impact, well, that's going to be a player that I'm going to look at, and I'm going to say, look, we need to get the club face a little bit more shut. We need to get the left wrist with that in a little more flexion, right? I've got options in closing the face. I can make the grip a little bit stronger, or I can go to the left wrist and flex the lead wrist. And every situation is a little different in where I'm going to go. But more times than not, in articulating this, how this is going to apply to you from a club face perspective, is that the club face oftentimes for so many needs to be a little bit more closed in the way of development. Because when you get the club face closed, what's going to start to happen is the club shaft will want to start to pitch back more. If you're an open face player and you come down steep and you're swinging over the top, well, that shaft, when you look at it with Viktor there, you can see it kind of laying down on the right forearm. It's going to be in between those forearms or closer to the left forearm. Like one of the compensations from an open face is we come down steep, we come down over the top. And then we do that because we're trying to get that face to look to the left. Or we come down and we just dump the shaft, lose shaft lean, we sacrifice shaft lean, and the club face closes, right? And so it goes straight, but we add loft, and it's like, well, now I'm hitting my 7-iron like my 9-iron. And I'm a big, strong guy, and I look at my buddies, and they're hitting their 7-iron 175 yards, and I'm hitting 160. And so you have to go to the club face, right? And the club face is the number one component. And so in the world of development, which I think is a strength of mine, and particularly in amateur golf and being able to elevate your ceiling so you can develop more skill, so often you got to change your pattern, and it starts with the club face. And more times than not, I got to shut that face so it's going to get a little shallower and start to promote some shaft lean. Okay? Because if you don't have any shaft lean, you've got to get some. And the more speed that you have, the more you can handle. So everybody's got to have a little bit of shaft lean. And it's amazing when you start incorporating some shaft lean into some players' game, that ceiling really starts to elevate. So the club face is something that you have to manage as a coach. And for me, I'm always looking at, I can go to the grip or I can get a little flexion in the lead wrist. I'll go to the lead wrist probably a little bit more than I will the grip. Okay. And again, every situation is different. But when I go to the lead wrist and I say some flexion in the lead wrist, and even when in Jonathan, like I think there's different levels of flexion, because you can be an extension and feel like you're flexed, but the reality is you're just closer to flat. And then you can say flexion and indeed be flexed at the top, like we see here with Viktor Hovland and Dustin Johnson and others. So flexion is a word that is, it depends on where you're coming from, right? If I've got someone cupped up their really extended left wrist, and I say, hey, I want you to feel bowed, and they leave here and say, yeah, he wants me to bow my wrist. And then it's like, well, go ahead and try to bow it. And they change that wrist angle. They're like, yeah, now it's bowed, but you're looking at it, it's like, well, actually, it's just less extended. It's actually still a little bit extended, but it's just less extended. So it's relative, right? And by no means am I trying to get someone looking like that, right? Or do they feel more like that? They do. Big difference, feeling real here. And I think it really applies in the application of the left wrist. I think the reality is most people listening could use a club face that needs to be a little more closed and could probably use a little more flexion in the left wrist. That's the reality. The one thing that flexion in the left wrist or more of it will give you, not only will the club face be a little bit more closed, but also it will start to encourage that shaft to pitch back, right? It'll encourage the shaft to pitch back, but also to maintain a good club face alignment where the face won't open too much. Sometimes the shaft will pitch back, but the face will get too open. What I like about getting that left wrist oftentimes more flexed is the shaft will pitch back and the club face will still remain square to slightly closed. That's a really good dynamic, probably for 90% of people listening right now. Like there's a really good chance you need more of that, right? Like you need a little more flexion in the left wrist. You need the shaft to pitch back a little bit more. You need the club face to be a touch more closed. Like that's a trifecta that most could probably use a little bit more of. Not all, but most. And when you're developing a swing, these are conversations that I'm having, right? These are conversations that I'm having with students to develop a swing, to elevate that ceiling, to develop more skill. improve the probability of impact. That's what I would consider a strength of mine in working with amateur golfers. So we all have our strengths, right? We all have our strengths. One of the strengths for Viktor Hovland is hitting the golf ball. This might be the best ball striker in the world right now, folks. And I want to clear a couple things up about Hovland's swing. I had a few people say he's coming over the top. When you look at Viktor Hovland, the first thing that you have to understand, okay, we just talked about the left. Look at that club face looking back towards the camera. Wow. Look at that club face. Yes. Now, you see the club shaft there. That club shaft is pointing inside the ball line. That club shaft's pretty vertical, right? It's not perfectly vertical, but it's close to vertical. It's vertical there and the lead arm is parallel. And now watch when it comes down. Now it's more horizontal, closer to 45. So it went from a vertical shaft to a more horizontal shaft coming down. That's what you see most players do. I'm not sure if there's a player that flattens the shaft more than Viktor Hovland. If there is, it's going to be close. So in the context of the club shaft, the shaft being more horizontal than it was going back, check, Viktor Hovland. So in theory, like that's not over the top. If you took it back more horizontal and then came down steeper, I fix that every day, all day, in person and online. Well, to me, that would be more, I guess, if I was going to say over the top, that would be more over the top because the shaft's coming down more vertical than it went back. I could show you thousands of those swings. In fact, I think in online gains this week, that was what we worked on. That's something you can learn from Viktor Hovland. Viktor Hovland takes it back more vertical, and then he shallows it in transition. That is something you can learn from Viktor Hovland. We can learn from Viktor Hovland that, okay, a little flexion lead wrist, club face closed, encourages the shaft pitch back, encourages some shaft length. Now, to that amount of degree, no, probably don't need that degree, right? Because we can't maybe move as dynamic as Vic. We could learn from Vic vertical to shallow to that degree, maybe not quite to that degree, but yeah, I think most of you listening need to move in that direction. So those are, these are some things that Vic does very well, but probably a bit on the extreme side. Now, the other thing Vic likes to do is he likes to fade it. And so now we got to talk about his hand path. And this is where I think the over-the-top concept comes in. Vic moves his hand path in and around deep. He's got a lot of depth. He gets his hand path going in and deep. Now, what Viktor does is he takes his hand path with that depth and he moves his hand path and it starts to arc back out in front of his chest. Look at his left arm. It's just past parallel coming down, but his hands are really out in front of his chest. His hands are out in front of his chest really as a function of how well he rotates. His hand path going out that way, the shaft pitches back, and then from there he can turn left and hit his fade. Now you compare that to a Rory. Rory is someone who is going to take his hands a little bit wider than around. And instead of his hands arcing more out towards the ball in transition, his hand path would come more down. Now, the reality is the hands come down in both examples, but in Viktor's case, his hand path works more out. So then when he turns, he can get his path back to the left. Rory, hand path comes more down. So when he turns, he's hitting it more from the inside, hence his draw. So when you start looking at these power draws, or as I like to call it, my training program, Operation Drip Fade, available on TravisHoldenGolf.com. This is a pattern that you see. You see a little flexion in the lead wrist, see the club face maybe a little shut. Again, Vic, extreme example. And then from there, you see some depth. See, I think one of the things that happens when players try to fade it, amateur players, is they try to fade it through the club face. Okay. They try to fade it through the club face. They think, well, I got to get the face more open. That is a way to fade it. Like you can get the club face more open and hit it with the face open, or trying to hang on through the strike and try to keep it with the face open. Usually the ball will start too far to the right and it'll fade. And usually you're hitting it with more of a side swipe. It's not a power fade. It's a weak high spin fade. And so when you look at the power fades, or as I say, the drip fade, or dare I say, you see the club face square, maybe a little closed. Doesn't have to be slammed shut closed like Vic. Again, some flexion in the lead wrist. And then you start to get the concept of how to get a little bit more on top of it. The hand path working a little more out like Vic, rotating back to the left. You use ball position by moving it up, sometimes alignment if you need to, opening up to the left to help get that path around to the left. But it's a power fade because the face isn't open, right? The face is square, a little shut, so they turn. Now they've got a little shaft lean. That face looks a little left. They're covering it and rotating hard to the left. That gets the path to the left, and they hit the power fade. It's not a wipe. And so a lot of times these power fades, they come from a square to slightly closed face, not an open face. And you see this hand path arc out and back around to the left like Viktor Hovland. Okay, so it's an interesting, really, it's an interesting swing, because you look at that and you see the hand path going out and you think he's coming over the top. Well, yeah, his hand path is working back out and then back around to the left, but the club shaft is laying down. And it's laying down as much as anybody in golf. So that's Viktor Hovland's swing. And hopefully that clears up a few things and how that might be a little different than Rory McIlroy. This guy's fun to watch, man. I mean, this guy, let me tell you something. I played around with golf. I played around in golf with Vic at Arnold Palmer Invitational right before he turned pro. Nicest guy in the world. And I mean, it's just a stripe show, man. I mean, it is nuts, like how freaking straight he hits it. And I would say the best long iron player in the world right now. And just driving the ball incredibly straight. And if he can continue to progress with the short game, it seems like he's in a good spot with Joseph Mayo. His putting seems to be okay. He can clip off one of these bigger events and get himself an elevated event, a major championship. You just kind of feel like he's going to really take off from there. The one thing I will say about Vic is look, I'd like to see him. I'd like to see him kind of stay put with Joseph Mayo. I thought Jeff Smith did a good job with him. They got the top 5 in the world. They got 3 wins together. And so he kind of jumped over to Joe, and things seem to be at least, progressing a little bit here, and he's getting closer. But I'd like to see him stay with Joe. Like I just get some stability there. All these top players, they have stability when it comes to their coaching staff. And you look at, Scotty Scheffler with Randy Smith and John Rahm with his coach from Spain and the TPI team and Phillips and Rose, Justin Thomas and his dad, Jordan Spieth and Cameron McCormick, Xander Schauffele and his dad and Ueda, his putting coach. I mean, they've been together for a long, long time. And Victor's kind of one of those guys that I just kind of see jumping around a little too much. Like he's the only one. Patrick Cantlay with Jamie Mulligan. So the list goes on. So just find some stability, Vic. Stay with Joe. Keep going. Keep building. You're going to get that next win. His golf swing's an interesting one. I thought we'd have some fun and show you that swing. All right, let's finish with this. Talked about Rory McIlroy, and I want to give you a few thoughts here on Rory. Rory's in the field this week at the Memorial as well, top 10 at the PGA. And his look, I have probably defended Rory more than most. To me, Rory is a fantastic person. I've got to walk around with Rory, meet Rory, spend a little time with Rory, see him in person, interacting with tournaments and people, the media. I like Rory McIlroy. if you had to have me pick between Rory McIlroy and Phil Mickelson and who's going to be the face of your franchise, it's a no-brainer. If you have to have me pick between those two, between who's going to watch my kids tonight, it's a no-brainer. If you had to ask me to pick between the two who I want to go on a family vacation with and who I would trust around my family and wife, it's a no-brainer. It's Rory McIlroy. But I think Rory, when you look at him, that he's getting sucked into this Twitter type of world, and it's easy to do. I've been through this as well. He's fielded, of course, over the last year, a ton of questions when it comes to PGA Tour and LIV Golf, and he's been the face and the spokesperson, I think, for the PGA Tour. And as I've said many times, I don't think any player should have to take on this amount of responsibility off the golf course when it comes to all of these things that are happening professional golf, PGA Tour, LIV, the golf ball, the Ryder Cup. It's insane. It's insane. No player should have to take on all of that off the course. I think Rory did initially, handled it very well. And I think it's really taken a toll on him. It's taken his toll as far as his performance on the golf course. But I think more than that, it's taken a toll on him personally. And he had to get away from the game. He just got overwhelmed with it. And so I liked his approach at the PGA when he came into the media and kind of deflected and pushed back and wasn't going to talk about it. It's the first time I think I've seen Rory just be like, hey guys, I'm here to play golf. And I like that. This week, I think he took the bait again at Memorial and talking about the Ryder Cup. And he took the bait again and talked about, yeah, Brooks deserves to be on the U.S. team because of his play, second at the Masters and first at the PGA. And then he didn't feel like that the other guys on the DP World Tour deserved to be on the European team. And kind of referring to Sergio and Ian Poulter and Lee and some of the staples, right? And then I think initially it was more about the play, like they haven't played well enough. But then as he continued, it kind of became more of this, it sounded more personal. And so Rory takes a beating for that. And so I just wish Rory would just take a step back and be like, look, I'm not talking about this stuff anymore. I'm not talking about this stuff anymore, and just get back to kind of putting that stuff away and just being a professional golfer again. And just being a professional golfer again. It's too much. I think he's over his head when it comes to all of these topics and trying to articulate and be all things perhaps to all people and really be the face of the PGA Tour. It's just too much. It's just too damn much. It's overwhelming. Twitter is overwhelming. You get on Twitter. I mean, just last night, I get on Twitter. The first thing that I see is a bunch of high school kids beating up a former military person. The second video I see is a kid setting off a firework in a bus. Then I turn on the local news, and you can imagine what that was all about. Then I go back to Twitter about an hour later, and it's politicians running every other politician on the other side through the ringer. I mean, it's just so much toxic information, right? And it's hard when you consume all that to stay to the core of who you are, right? It's hard. I have been critical. I have been guilty of all this as well, to where it's so overwhelming that it starts to change you and your attitude and your approach, and you got to put it down. And so you take that on Twitter and all that, and then you got to sit in front of a microphone. You got to take it face to face with all the media. And then you got to have these individual conversations with players. It's just too damn much, man. It's just too much. You can't handle all that. And so I say to Rory, quit taking the bait. Quit taking the bait. Get back to Rory McIlroy and playing professional golf. Because when Rory is focused on playing professional golf, I've been saying this for years on the podcast, it's must-watch TV. It's must-watch TV. Brooks Koepka is a fantastic player, one of the best in the world, is going to go to the Hall of Fame. But with all cylinders hitting, Rory is the best player in the world. Get back to being Rory on the golf course. The hell with everybody else. Let them figure it out. You don't need to figure out all of these things off the course. All right. Enough with that. That's Thursday podcast. Hope you enjoyed it. Some instructions, some thoughts. And we'll be back next week. Stripe Show podcast. Enjoy the memorial, everyone. We'll see you on Tuesday with Keith Stewart. All things RBC Canadian Open. Hey, I heard Michael Block is playing. Let's get excited, everybody. See you later.